Welcome to Multidimensional Health with Dr. Toni. I'm happy you're joining me today because we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and that is finding balance in your life. But before we get started, I want to remind you that my Healing with Medicine Spices course is available for you to purchase on my website. It is an incredible and fun course that goes beyond teaching you the health benefits of spices. In this course, you will learn how spices impact your emotional health and how to use the energy of spices to boost your health. You will also learn how to make medicine from these wonderful herbs. So why bringing balance is important to your life? Well, when you are centered and in sync with yourself, you have the capacity to make decisions from a place of inner power and stability and boost your manifestation powers. Living in balance takes conscious effort to remain within this empowered state of mind. But the more you practice getting in touch with the core of your being, the easier it becomes to tap into this essence and realize the benefits with greater consistency. The key to navigating your life with ease is to maintain your equilibrium within a world full of dualities and endless activity abounding in every decision that you need to make. In this show, my guest clinical herbalist and intuitive reader Gianne and I will discuss the concept of duality along with a tool that you can use to develop your sense of equanimity, a state of mental calmness and stability, especially when you're under stress, strain, or a difficult situation. I hope you enjoy the show. And if you want to learn more about Gianne, visit her website at greasewood.botanicals.com or find her on social media under the same name. Again, Greasewood Botanicals. Hi, Gianne. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, Toni. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I am so happy that you're here. I think you have like a great topic that we usually don't tend to talk in the holistic environment, and that is how do we mix the conventional approach with our spirituality and how those two things come together. And I think it's very important.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are onto it, and a lot of people kind of do mix conventional and spiritual approaches naturally, but it's probably something they do unconsciously. So it'd be nice to just kind of talk about it and kind of bring this to more of like a conscious forefront in
So
our
what's
time.
your experience with that? How did you come up with that?
Well, so I feel like I'm going to talk in terms of astrology at points in this interview, just because I feel like it's a great way to frame
Hmm.
certain themes that have come up for me in my life. So I am a Gemini moon and a Libra sun. So for those of you who are not familiar, so just like a quick rundown of astrological symbolism. So it sounds like we're starting hard and fast with the spiritual side of things. So the Libra archetype is represented by the scales. And so it's a lot about balancing inherently opposing ideas and trying to bring them into unity. Similarly, Gemini being represented by the twins, it's another sort of vibration or frequency of duality,
Hmm.
but balancing duality to eventually come into non-duality. So it's always this kind of, I've always felt in my life a kind of pendulum swing or a back and
Hmm.
forth between being very analytical and scientific, and then being very creative and very intuitive and feminine. But I was never in like an environment that necessarily nurtured both at
Hmm.
once. So like growing up, I was very artistic and I did a lot of creative work. And then when it came time to go to college, which wasn't arguably like that long ago, like a baby, yeah, I had to make a choice to kind of put that aside and really embrace my analytical, logical thinking, because the university I attended, UCSC, was just very science oriented. That's what it was known for. That's how all of their classes kind of approached topics, even the art classes. Like it was like, yeah, we're gonna do art, but we're gonna code it. Like, so it was. I was like, what? So I kind of had, I feel like, some sort of like mini identity crises throughout my life in that regard, and that balancing of like the duality between, you know, masculine archetypal thinking, feminine archetypal thinking. And then there came a point where I really had to just shift gears. It was like a year or so after college, and I was working as a graphic designer. So, you know, very stereotypically creative job, but I was realizing more and more how not creative it was in a way. Like it was a very kind of regimented, like problem solving field, which wasn't bad, but it was just maybe the circumstances just kind of made it so that I had to really put a pause. And I was kind of flung into kind of like another timeline, so to speak. I had to quit my job, do all the things. But in doing that, I was able to kind of, you know, realize deep down, like where I felt, you know, my convictions lay and my purpose was, and that was to be in more of a healing modality and to work more creatively, but in a way that could really solve, you know, people's problems. And so through my own sort of recovery, and that whole year, which is very like mental health oriented, I was thrown through a lot of institutions and systems in like Western psychiatry, which, you know, I was seeking for help in, because that's what I was taught, you know, like that's what you do. Like you go to your therapist, and my therapist was beautiful, like bless her soul. I'll talk about her later and her approach, but it was just the system itself felt incompatible to me. And so ever since then up until now was a journey of finding out like, how can I really reconcile like my creative approach to, you know, living healthily, but in a way that will really help others. And so that's how I became an herbalist. And that's how I have stepped more into my inherent kind of way of operating as intuitive. And so really just building on that, building those skills for the past few years has helped me really explore those dualities. Because as I'm working more and more in like the, you know, health field, for lack of a better term, the wellness field, the complementary alternative medicine field, that as we call it here in the States at least, I'm recognizing so much duality still. I'm recognizing so much separation that still exists between, you know, medicine as it is, like capital M medicine, you know, like doctors, physicians, that approach, allopathic, and then even holistic medicine, and then like spiritual medicine. So it's kind of like a crazy spectrum that is not necessarily integrated yet. So in my lifetime, I'm hoping to see that happen. That's something I feel very passionate about. So yes.
Yeah, and it's I think our Western society kind of is very analytical and very like more male energy, and so like even though we have created jobs, we get pushed into thinking and making decisions and like if then else, right? Like very structured. So they don't let us do this creative approach, or it's not that they don't let us, it's just not appreciated. It gets turned down as not valid. But a lot of us, I think, are suffering from that. And a lot of our stress is because we're trying to be who we're not, or we're forced to just be in one type of energy instead of, it's meant to be balanced. It's meant to be male and female kind of energy. And we kind of give ourselves time to embrace both sides. And so that's very important and to heal, especially in mental health, and give it that time for nourishing, which is lacking. A lot of people don't have time to nourish even when they come to a therapist. And I know I get a lot of clients that come to me and the first thing they say, oh, what you're asking me to do requires time. Well, yeah, as part of the healing process, you had to take time to meditate and be with yourself and learn about yourself and your creative side, and in order to heal that hole that you have. But I don't have time. I have to take the kids and I have to do this and I have to do that. All those have tos, you know.
Yeah. And what you were just saying too about like, you know, being with myself and like meditating and just being as a verb is so inherently feminine. And I was just talking about this with like a couple of friends, but like how our society, like you were saying, is kind of shifted so far into this masculine, and I kind of I feel weird about using those terms too. I wish there
Mhm.
were kind of like better terms, you know, like masculine and feminine are not necessarily referring to gender.
Yes.
Just they're a framework of terminology
Mhm.
that is easily understood as being, you know, archetypal, like
Mhm.
this list of things equals what we call masculine, this list of
Mhm.
things what we call feminine. So
Which is the
um
yin and the yang in the end, but a lot
yeah,
of people do not understand the difference between yin and yang, and so, but that's actually what we're
totally.
defining. Yeah.
And like being is so feminine, and I think like knowing you, Toni, like and like your work that you do and how you work, I feel like really kind of reflects my own inherent ethics too. And so for us, like it's our like special kind of personal project to really like explore the meaning of just being and
Mhm.
not doing or not striving really.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's hard for a lot of people, I
Yes.
feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially a lot of my listeners, we tend to be a little bit type A and try to
Mhm.
manifest a lot, and so that requires a lot of effort and always striving and putting some, I was gonna say not realistic limits, but some like very ambitious limit, and that kind of puts pressure on us and puts a lot of stress and expectations that are unnecessary, and just sitting and just being with ourselves and or watching the clouds seems like we're wasting time, but we're not. It's part of the
That's the
energy.
work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. In a
exactly.
weird, like, counterintuitive way. Like, that is the healing. It's
Mhm.
not, you know, crushing goals and even like recovery goals. So, like, since we're talking about mental health and things like that, I've felt in my personal experience, just how quote unquote masculine, uh, analytical, logical, and kind of like if then,
Mhm.
our for more or less our contemporary like mental health systems are, and they operate that way,
Mhm.
even though the inherent goal is to, help people feel comfortable with who they are.
Mhm.
Like a lot of mental health circumstances aren't, things that disappear completely.
Mhm.
And the term that they use commonly in, things like psychotherapy is like managing. You're
Mhm.
managing or you're coping. But it's almost like those words kind of don't convey a sense of peace,
Mhm.
right? Like I feel like
Yeah.
when I'm trying to, in my experience, I can't speak for everyone, but when I was told like, okay, you need to manage symptoms, you need to cope with symptoms, it was like, oh, but so my symptoms are like bad, and like I have to like stuff them down, or else they're gonna like eat me alive again, and it's like terrible. But like, in coming back to that feminine idea of being, like how can we be at peace and accept, what we were given, and
Mhm.
what is the underlying, lesson behind us working through those things, and like can we feel at peace?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like you're saying, you're right. When I hear the word managing, and for me, it feels like getting through it, like almost a work, like work.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Totally.
heavy. It
Mhm.
feels heavy. And coping feels even worse. Coping seems like I'm not even making it. I just have to
Yeah.
tolerate it.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
it is pretty, it almost makes you feel even worse about yourself, which impacts more your mental health and your stress and your
Right.
anxiety, because here I am coping or managing,
Here
and
I am coping.
and the truth is it's all about the journey, and I think you get
Right.
to learn that with time. And in the spiritual aspect of that, it's just going with the flow. And I know it might suck right now, but it's like, how do I get how do I go through that journey so to get to the other side where it's better. And a lot of it is just accepting yourself and where you are, and just it's a yeah, it is important. I mean, it's not to say that the Western approach doesn't have its value, because it does, and they have a lot of good tools that helps us. Let's say the word cope when we're going through it. Um, but it has its good sides too.
It does. It does. And like a woman I'm working with, so in my client work, I'm currently in the middle of a clinic course at my local like herbal botanical school here where I live. And I was fortunate enough to work with a client who has a very heavy mental health circumstance that she lives with. And I was given the opportunity to, you know, help her grow. And I'm using her terms. Her specific goals in healing was to see how she could grow out of her diagnosis,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I've never heard actually in my own experience, kind of going through similar institutions that she has been through, you know, like the hospitals or the group therapies. Like I've never heard anyone use the word grow. It was always manage. It was always cope.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very beautiful. And I was so excited to work with her because her disposition, you know, to her own healing journey was so positive and was so, you know, not only accepting, it was beyond accepting. It was like she maintained such a, I don't know, it's like an energy that exuded, you know, peace and groundedness at the same time. And so whatever that has worked for her in her experience of, you know, recovery and things like that has been, it looks like, you know, it's working fantastically. And so it was very inspiring to even just kind of talk to her for an hour to get to know her. And I was grateful too, because her specific goals in our consultation together was to approach this from a more spiritual perspective. Because realistically, there isn't much you can do in terms of modulating, you know, brain chemistry to that degree with herbs. I mean, I'm sure it can be done, but it'll be very tricky. And so I think the way that we approached her growing was very apt and appropriate. And it was being very gentle, again, kind of feminine archetype, being very nourishing to her physical nervous system, because I think oftentimes we forget that it's a structure. Oftentimes, like because feelings are so subjective and like airy, we forget that it's also grounded in earth, you know, those elemental archetypes. It's the nerves are physical things. And so what we were doing with her herbal protocol was really just nourishing her nervous system framework. And how we tied in like the spiritual element that she was looking for was we gave her affirmations to work with when she made the tea. And she's such a beautiful soul. Like she does tea ceremonies for her family. She's of Japanese ethnicity, and so it's a big part of our culture. And so to be able to weave that medicine in to her daily life, I think she really took on to it well. And so we're still kind of like in the preliminary stages, but that was just, you know, a recent experience I've had where spirituality in a way can really ground mental health practices and mental health protocols.
And if you do them, like you said, like mantras or affirmations, and if you do them over and over, you start rewiring your brain. So you're actually, because of neuroplasticity, you do actually enforce some changes. And I think, unfortunately, even though there is a lot of science now about neuroplasticity and quantum physics, it still hasn't been integrated into the conventional medicine. They're a little bit on the behind on that. And so they don't tend to talk about that, but you could rewire the brain if, well, it requires a lot of work, like you said, but it is possible. I mean, there's so many studies of the placebo effect that people just change, and they change their physiology, including their chemistry, just by thinking. If you tell them that this is going to help you and they believe it, it will happen for them. And so it's incredible what the mind has accomplished. And like you said, sometimes we tend to think about thoughts because they're so intangible. But I heard somebody said that thoughts are the language of the brain, but feelings and emotions are language of the body. And so they're just the thoughts, and that's how you feel those thoughts in your body. And so it is so there is it is tangible because you're feeling them in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like in that vein of, you know, bridging duality into non-duality with these medical practices, realms, there is that sort of bridging and unifying between like our thoughts and our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something we discussed too when I was in college. Like I studied cognitive science as a major at UCSD, and one like kind of preliminary debate that you were introduced to, you know, like as like a first or second year was like the idea of the brain in the jar kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
model, or the concept of embodied cognition, where your physical body and the way that you act or you know, operate on a physical level will affect your cognition, and then it becomes this sort of cycle of like cognition affects your body affects
Mm-hmm.
cognition. And so I felt it was so fascinating. I mean, I think if I could pick one, I identified with the latter a little more. But you know, it's also hard, like, who's to say? Unless, you know, I feel like I spent a lot of my time just like sitting in my bathroom thinking about like, am I just life experiencing itself? Like, so yeah, good times. But yeah, it's a mental health is so much of the physical, and a lot of what we do in meditation. I host meditations from time to time via Zoom, and it's in the tradition of Jane Richmond and her mentors, and Amy Johnson through the Berkeley Psychic Institute. A lot of their meditations draw kind of on that. They draw from that embodied cognition sort of perspective, where it's like, and this actually doesn't even have to fit with everyone's approach to meditation. I know for you, Toni, you quite rather prefer a sort of transcendent approach to meditation. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes, yes. I
Yeah.
do. I do a lot of mindfulness to recondition my mind and to be present.
Right.
It just grounds me. And then I do a lot of transcendent and more in the evening. So the morning I do mindfulness so I can be more mindful during the day and more
Mm.
present in what I'm doing. And then in the evening, since I'm just gonna go to sleep, then I do more about transcendental, more spiritual meditation. Yes.
Kind of, oh, that's so fascinating. I know you've told me you've had a lot of like crazy cool experiences, like, where's my body? Literally.
Yes.
Have what she's having. Um,
All meditation. I haven't taken
I know,
anything.
right? Substance free tripping, guys. Where it's at. No.
It's all Kundalini. It's interesting. It's fascinating because what you're doing is you're just moving the chemistry that you have in your body. And so you're just converting melatonin into melatonin derivatives, and then you bring more oxytocin into your body. It's all hormones you have in your body. And so what
Right.
you do is that with these type of breathing and meditations, you learn to invoke them or bring them to the surface. And you do, it's not just this out of body feeling, which feels really good because it just frees you up and it makes you feel relaxed, but creating that amount of oxytocin on demand, it's just, you just feel more oneness and connected to everybody. And so it's hard to be angry at your boyfriend or angry at your son or whatnot, because you're like walking around with a ton of oxytocin in your body, and you just feel good, and you feel more compassionate and care for others. And so
Totally.
that's how I didn't get impacted by the election at all.
Good for you. I know these past few weeks have brought on tons of, shadow work. And so it's good. I feel like, a lot of people are all about the shadow work, like me including,
Mhm.
like tapping into your body, really feeling the feelings, and, doing that sort of self-directed analysis and feeling, not so much like a cognitive like analysis per se, but just kind of like a a facing of
Mhm.
those heavier feelings, and then letting them go, and like replacing them, or replacing the space that you created rather with like the sort of feelings that you were talking about, like that love and that freeness.
Mhm.
So that's the meditation that I kind of host. But I think it's great that you brought that style up, because a lot of people, you know duality again, a lot of people will either kind of swing one way or the other. They're like, oh no, just shadow work, like, no love and light, like love and light is bypassing. And in some cases, yes. And, but I don't feel like you can really subsist on just shadow work. Like once the work is done, like what can you do to really re-nourish yourself and re-uplift
Exactly.
yourself? And it's
Which is what I do, because the
totally
morning mindfulness, well, you become aware of everything that you don't want that you
really
don't
aware.
like. That's when you really are there with yourself, and your thoughts, and it's not
Absolutely.
about who triggers you or not triggers you. It's just being aware, and
Totally.
it's being aware of being aware. And so that's a pretty
Oh yeah.
interesting thing. So I totally recommend that when people are struggling with mental health, mindfulness meditations. I think the way to start, because it's also structure, and so sometimes it's hard when you've been in a world that is very structured to just let you go on a oh, let's in the air, and floating.
Yeah.
You don't feel
Abstract.
yeah. Plus you don't you feel uncomfortable because you don't know what's next, and also your body pulls you, because we are addicted to the way we think and the way we feel, even if it's negative. And I know some people have a hard time, but this is science. It's been proven. We are addicted to the chemistry that our current emotions and situations bring to us, to the point that when we're not feeling that, we create situations subconsciously in order to feel that way again, even though we don't like it. And
Yes.
so by being mindful, we learn that learn to identify and stop ourselves and says, do I really want this? Is this going to bring me closer to my dream or further away from my dream? And that's just a moment of you pause before you speak, before you act. And that stops you from arguing with your husband, or stops you from creating a fight with your mom or your kids and stuff, because is it really worth saying it? Am I trying to win here, or am I trying to make a difference in somebody's lives? And it just
Yes.
it's a different way of looking at the world.
Oh yeah. Yes. That's so true. And then I just, since I'm in this mode in my life where I'm really parsing and feeling into like those, feminine and masculine archetypes, like in your whole like speech there, or, in your whole segment of talking there, you could really identify like what parts of the language being masculine, what
Hmm.
parts of the language being feminine. And it ties into, the way mental health is framed.
Hmm.
And I think the framing is such an important aspect of like kind of like whether or not someone feels good like doing a regimen, or doing a regimen is such a masculine term, doing like, a protocol or
Structure.
recommendation
Hmm.
structure. Yeah. And so like a huge concept in like those archetypal in that archetypal energy work is like the masculine structure can it's the high expression of it is to be able to use its gifts of like structure to create that framework where
Hmm.
femininity can like exist unapologetically and
Exactly. Hmm.
yeah, unbridled. And so I think that's so beautiful in the way that mental health tools can be used in order for you to really lean into being, and the structure and the masculine can work very well in that regard. um, and so like for example, I when I was going through my kind of recovery period, a lot of one main recommendation I kept hearing from like, my group therapist and my private therapist was like, you should, think about having a routine. It'll really, get into a routine, write down a list of things you're going to do throughout the day. And, routines, lists, they're very masculine. They're very like check, 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 like itemized, serial. And at the time I was like, oh God, I don't want to do this shit. Like, I don't want to do this stuff. It just seems it's at the time seemed very limiting. And when I was thinking about, how I was before my whole like recovery period, I was like, I was so, I was spontaneous, and I was like, I didn't have routines. But it's like, well, shit, like here I am. Maybe a routine is what I needed all along. And so it wasn't until maybe a year or two later when I was really embracing the spiritual, aspects of myself, being a reader, working spiritually with others, that I realized that a routine is just it's a way to ground yourself, you
It's a
know, if you
tool.
think
Yeah.
it's a tool. It's,
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it in terms of elemental archetypes, which are
Mm-hmm.
very understandable to and relatable to, you know, the human psyche, like earth, fire, air, water, those archetypes imbue so much of, you know, spirituality in itself. Routines are just an expression of, you know, of earth.
Mm-hmm.
And within that earth, you can, you know, hold water, you can hold fire and your creativity and your feelings and your ideas, your air. And so, so yeah, I very much cherish my routines now because they give me that structure to feel secured, and that security is like the basis of
Mm-hmm.
everything.
And I love that you said that it just because we have a structure or a routine doesn't mean that you're limited creatively. A lot of
Yeah,
people, one of the things that I often get asked is, how do you accomplish so much? And I always give credit to my structure and the routines that I have. But it doesn't mean that I'm mechanically doing things. I just have a structure. And so I do get things done, but I'm doing creative stuff within the structure. And
right.
without that structure, I wouldn't finish anything. I would have a lot of projects started and I never get to it, or I never finish. And so the structure brings closure. It brings that formula gets everything done. But what I'm doing is actually being very creative. I mean, it
Within
is,
that. Yeah,
yeah, within that aspect of it. Because again, it's all about balance, about that yin and yang. You need both things. You can't be too masculine or too feminine, because then too feminine, you always also end up too airy or too the other extreme. So it's about
right.
balance. So this was a great conversation, Gianne. I love it. I love it. This was great. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is great to just kind of chat and talk. And I love, I love you, man, to
I
be
love you
doing
too. And you'll be back soon too. We'll talk about other topics too.
Cool. All right. Well, take care.
You
I
too.
love you.
Bye.